I stood there in the dim glow of the basement stairs, my daughter's hand firm on the door as she shoved me inside. "You're pathetic," she whispered, her voice laced with that familiar venom. "Sit here in the dark where you belong." The lock clicked shut, echoing like a final judgment, but I didn't pound or plead. I just sank onto the cold concrete, my heart a quiet storm of resignation. For years, I'd poured my savings into her dreams, my labor into her home, my soul into her happiness, only to be discarded like yesterday's trash. Yet, as the party laughter filtered down from above, I felt a spark ignite. Justice wasn't a scream, it was a strategy. And tonight, her world would begin to unravel. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. That day, I found myself polishing champagne flutes in my daughter's kitchen at 6 a.m., not because the party started early, but because Chloe had texted me at midnight with a revised timeline that began with, "Dad, emergency cleanup needed." The morning moved like a fever dream. Chloe sat at my kitchen table, the oak table I'd built with my own hands when she was 12, painting her nails blood red while orchestrating my destruction with surgical precision. "Did you transfer the money to the caterers?" she asked without looking up, each word clipped and efficient. I nodded. "What about the florist?" Another nod. "The photographer?" Nod. She was conducting a symphony of my financial ruin, and I was the obedient orchestra. But then I caught something that made my stomach drop. She was practicing in her phone's camera, not taking photos. Practicing. Rehearsing her shocked gasp, her delighted squeal, the way she'd cover her mouth when Blake proposed tonight. Over and over, perfecting each micro-expression like an actress preparing for opening night. "How's this look?" she asked, showing me her surprised face. The question hit me like ice water. She wanted my approval of her performance, of being surprised by a proposal I was paying for, at a party I was funding for a ring I'd helped finance. The absurdity was breathtaking. "Very convincing," I said quietly, and something flickered behind her eyes. Suspicion, maybe, or recognition that I was finally seeing through the glass. The guests began trickling in around 6. Designer handbags, expensive watches, the kind of people who measured worth in zip codes and stock portfolios. I watched from my assigned post in the kitchen as Chloe transformed, spine straightening, smile brightening, voice lifting into that musical register she reserved for impressing strangers. She wasn't just acting, she was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who'd never needed anyone, never struggled, never had a father who worked himself hollow to give her everything. "Chloe's so independent," I heard Blake's mother gush. "It's refreshing to meet a young woman who's built her own life." My daughter preened under the praise, accepting compliments for achievements that existed only because I'd bled my bank account dry. But what destroyed me wasn't the lies, it was watching her believe them. She'd performed the role of self-made success so long she'd forgotten the man behind the curtain making it all possible. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Blake's father, a silver-haired partner at some prestigious firm, approached Chloe with champagne and curiosity. "You must get your drive from your father," he said warmly. "Successful men usually raise successful daughters." "Thank you," I said, stepping forward with a grateful smile. "That's very kind of you to notice. You know what they say." I paused for effect. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but sometimes it takes a really good throw to get it there." Blake's father chuckled genuinely, raising his glass. "Ha! I like that." Very true. But Chloe's laugh was different. Light, musical, poisonous. "Oh, my dad's he tries really hard to be helpful. It's sweet, actually. He gets so excited when I let him contribute to things." She gestured vaguely toward me as if I were a pet who'd learned a particularly endearing trick. Let him contribute. To the life I'd built for her. Brick by financial brick. Blake's father looked confused by the sudden shift in tone, but Chloe continued, her voice dropping just enough to seem confidential. "Though honestly, between you and me, I think he needs this more than I do. Purpose, you know? Some people just need to feel useful." The words hit me like a physical blow. Useful. Not loved, not appreciated, not respected. Useful, like a tool she kept sharp for specific jobs. That's when our eyes met across the small circle. And in that instant, I saw something that made my blood freeze. She knew exactly what she'd done. The calculated cruelty, the public humiliation disguised as affection, and she didn't care. If anything, there was a challenge in her gaze, a silent dare. What are you going to do about it? Dad, she called out sweetly, her voice pitched just right for Blake's father to hear. Could you help me with something downstairs? I think there's a problem with the electrical panel. A problem with the electrical panel, as if I were the maintenance man summoned for a service call. I felt my feet moving before my mind could process what was happening, following her toward the basement door with that same automatic obedience I'd perfected over years of saying yes to everything she asked. The basement door clicked shut behind us, and for a moment we stood in that dim space surrounded by the remnants of our family history. My old toolbox, still dusty from the last project I'd completed for her. Christmas decorations I'd carefully stored after hanging them in her living room. Photo albums she'd asked me to keep for safekeeping but never looked at again. Chloe, I said quietly, my voice echoing off the concrete walls, what's really going on here? She turned to face me, and in the half-light filtering down from upstairs, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not just coldness, but a kind of clinical detachment, like she was studying a specimen under glass. What's going on, she said slowly, is that you're embarrassing me. Again. Her voice was different down here, stripped of the honey-sweet performance she maintained upstairs. This was her real voice, sharp and cutting as winter wind. Embarrassing you? The words came out smaller than I intended. Chloe, I just made conversation with Blake's father. He was being kind. Kind? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, he was being polite. There's a difference. And you. She shook her head, looking at me with something that might have been pity if it weren't so cruel. You think everyone wants to hear your little jokes, your stories about what a great father you've been. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I thought back to Blake's father's genuine laugh, the warmth in his eyes when he'd complimented Chloe. Had I misread it all? Had I been performing too, desperate for validation I didn't even realize I was seeking? I raised you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I gave you everything. College, law school, this apartment, your car. You gave me money, she interrupted, her voice clinical, precise. That's not the same thing as being a father. The cruelty in that statement took my breath away. I felt myself drifting back to when she was 7, sobbing in my arms after her first day of school. Daddy, will you always take care of me? She'd whispered. Always, sweetheart, I'd promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. Do you remember, I said carefully, when you used to call me your hero? Something flickered across her face, so brief I almost missed it. But then her expression hardened again, like a door slamming shut. I was a child, she said flatly. Children believe in heroes. Adults understand that some people are just useful for a while. Useful. There was that word again, clinical and cutting. But this time, hearing it in this basement surrounded by the ghosts of our relationship, I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a carefully planned execution. She'd brought me down here not to spare me embarrassment, but to deliver a message. You're firing me, I said quietly, the realization washing over me like cold water, from being your father. Her smile was small, satisfied, terrible. I'm setting boundaries, Dad. Healthy boundaries. Blake's family doesn't need to see this dependency you have, this need to be included in everything. Dependency. As if my love for her, my pride in her, my desire to be part of her life was some kind of pathological condition that needed managing. Chloe, I whispered, feeling something break inside my chest. I'm your father. I'll always be your father. Biologically, yes, she said with a shrug. But functionally, that's more flexible. I stared at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, and felt 26 years of love and sacrifice crystallize into something harder, clearer. She hadn't brought me down here to spare anyone embarrassment. She'd brought me down here to show me my place in her new world order. At the bottom, I felt myself sinking onto the concrete step, the weight of 26 years of blind devotion finally crushing me. She stood over me in the dim light, and for a moment I saw something almost like satisfaction cross her face. You know what you are, Dad? She whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, the one I'd bought her for Christmas. You're pathetic. Sit here in the dark where you belong. The words hit me like a physical slap, but what destroyed me wasn't their cruelty. It was the calm certainty with which she delivered them. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was her truth about me, stated as simply as if she were commenting on the weather. She turned and headed for the stairs, pausing only to add, "I'll tell everyone you're not feeling well. Stay down here until the party's over." The door closed. The lock clicked. And I sat there in the darkness she'd assigned me, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not breaking, crystallizing, hardening into something that felt dangerously close to clarity. Because sitting in that basement, listening to the celebration I'd funded echo above me, I finally understood what my daughter had been trying to teach me all these years. I was pathetic. I had been accepting scraps of affection in exchange for everything I had to give. But you know what? Sometimes the most pathetic thing you can do is continue being pathetic. And I was done. Because you see, when someone shows you exactly who they are, the kindest thing you can do, for both of you, is believe them. The concrete was cold against my back as I leaned against the basement wall, but my mind was burning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Above me, I could hear the muffled sounds of my daughter's perfect party. Laughter, clinking glasses, the orchestra of a life I'd built but was no longer invited to enjoy. This charade had to end. Tonight. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to Chloe at 8 years old, standing in this very basement, watching me build her a dollhouse. "Daddy, you're the best builder in the whole world," she'd exclaimed, her small hands sticky with the glue she'd insisted on helping with. When had that adoring little girl learned to weaponize love? When had gratitude transformed into entitlement? Mike's voice echoed in my memory from last Christmas. "David, she's bleeding you dry and you're thanking her for the privilege. One day you're going to wake up and realize you raised a stranger." I'd been furious with him then. Now, sitting in this basement prison, I realized he'd been trying to save me from this exact moment. The sounds above shifted, chairs scraping, voices settling around the dining table. Chloe's voice carried clearly, "Everyone, please take your seats. We have something special planned for dessert." Her tone was electric with anticipation. The proposal was coming, but not yet. First, the dinner. First, the performance of perfect family harmony. That's when something clicked. After 30 years of living in this house, I knew every creaking board, every loose fixture, every maintenance trick, including the fact that the basement door lock had a safety release on this side. Installed years ago when Chloe was a toddler and I was paranoid about her getting trapped down here. The irony was beautiful. I stood up, feeling along the door frame until my fingers found the small manual release. One simple twist, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. The door opened silently. I'd oiled those hinges myself last month. I moved carefully through the house, staying to the shadows. Through the dining room doorway, I could see them all gathered around my grandmother's mahogany table, the one I'd restored for Chloe's housewarming. Blake's parents looked pleased and expectant. Chloe glowed with anticipation, her engagement ring finger conspicuously bare as she waited for her scripted moment of surprise. But what struck me most was how comfortable they all looked, how easily they'd accepted my absence. Chloe had told them I was feeling unwell, and here they were, enjoying my hospitality without me, in my house, eating food I'd paid for, preparing to witness a proposal I'd financed. The beautiful, terrible truth was that I wasn't missed at all. I was just the financial foundation they built their celebration on, and foundations are meant to be invisible. But what if the foundation decided to make itself known? I slipped into the kitchen, my mind racing with possibilities. The caterer had left everything perfectly arranged. The dessert course, the champagne flutes, the small velvet box I'd helped Blake shop for hidden behind the fruit bowl. All of it waiting for Chloe's moment of triumph. That's when I saw it. The perfect, poetic justice of it all. Chloe had always been proud of her hosting skills, her attention to detail, her ability to orchestrate perfect social moments. She'd learned it from watching me. Except she'd forgotten that I was the one who taught her every trick she knew, including how to make a dramatic entrance. I could hear her voice from the dining room, building toward the crescendo. "I just want to say how grateful I am to have all of you here tonight, sharing this special moment with us. Special moment. In my house, at my table, with my money. Time to remind everyone whose house this really was. I stepped into the dining room doorway, and the conversation died instantly. Every face turned toward me, Blake's parents looking confused, Chloe's expression shifting from surprise to something close to panic. Dad? Her voice cracked slightly. I thought you said you weren't feeling well. I smiled, feeling more clear-headed than I had in years. Actually, sweetheart, I'm feeling better than I have in a very long time. The silence stretched, tension crackling like electricity. Chloe's perfectly planned evening hung in the balance, and for the first time in decades, I held the power to decide what happened next. In fact, I continued, my voice carrying easily to every corner of the room, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about some things. Don't you? Chloe's face went pale, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of the truth. Of her carefully constructed world crumbling in front of the very people she was trying to impress. The proposal would have to wait. Because her father, the pathetic man she'd locked in the basement, had just taken center stage. The silence that followed my entrance was deafening. You could practically hear Chloe's heart hammering against her ribs as her perfectly orchestrated evening began to unravel in real time. David, Blake's mother exclaimed with genuine concern, half rising from her chair. Chloe said you weren't feeling well. Are you all right? I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Not cruel, just quietly satisfied. I appreciate your concern, Helen, but as you can see, I'm perfectly fine. Funny thing about feeling unwell, sometimes what you really need is just a moment of clarity. Chloe's eyes darted frantically between me and her guests, her mind clearly racing to find a way to salvage the situation. Dad, maybe you should go rest. Actually, sweetheart, I interrupted gently, settling into the empty chair at the head of the table, my chair in my house. I've been resting, down in the basement, where you put me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blake's father looked confused, glancing between Chloe and me. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Oh, it's quite simple, I said, my voice conversational, almost cheerful. Chloe was concerned that my presence might overwhelm you important people, so she asked me to wait downstairs while you enjoyed the party. The party I paid for, in the house I own, eating food I provided. Chloe's face cycled through a rainbow of emotions, panic, anger, embarrassment, desperation. Dad, you're not making sense. You said you weren't feeling well, and I thought... What I said, I corrected, my voice still gentle, but carrying a steel edge that made everyone lean forward slightly, was that I'm feeling better than I have in years. Clear-headed, you might say. Funny how being locked in a basement can give you perspective. Blake cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm sorry, locked in the... Let me paint you a picture, I said, addressing Blake's parents directly. Tonight, my daughter told me I was pathetic and belonged in the dark. Then she physically locked me in the basement while you all enjoyed yourselves upstairs. The same daughter who's wearing a dress I bought, serving food I paid for, in a home I helped furnish, planning to marry a man whose education I helped finance. The words landed like grenades around the table. Blake's mother's hand flew to her chest, while his father's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching disgust, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me or Chloe. That's not... Chloe started, but her voice cracked. She was trapped, and we both knew it. Deny it, and I could prove her wrong. Admit it, and she'd revealed her true nature to the very people she was trying to impress. David, Blake's father said carefully, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Would you like to see the basement door? I offered pleasantly. It locks from the outside. Has a safety release on the inside. Thank God. A precaution I installed years ago when Chloe was a toddler. Ironic, really. I was protecting her from getting trapped, not protecting myself from her. Chloe's composure finally cracked. You're embarrassing yourself, she hissed, but her voice shook. And me, in front of my guests. Your guests? I raised an eyebrow. Helen, Robert, I addressed Blake's parents directly. Did Chloe mention that this house belongs to me? That the engagement ring on the table was purchased with my credit card? That Blake's law school loans were paid off with money from my retirement account? The silence that followed was profound. Blake looked like he'd been punched in the stomach, while his parents exchanged meaningful glances, the kind that spoke volumes about their sudden reassessment of the young woman they'd thought was so impressively independent. Mr. Thompson, Blake's father said slowly, I think there may be some things we need to discuss. But Chloe wasn't done fighting. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floors I'd refinished last summer. This is ridiculous. Dad, you're having some kind of episode. Maybe we should call someone. The only episode I'm having, I said calmly, is a moment of clarity, 26 years overdue. I turned back to Blake's parents. Would you like to know how much money I've given your future daughter-in-law over the past decade? I have receipts. Dad, stop. Chloe's voice was raw now, all pretense abandoned. Just stop. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Because it's embarrassing? Because it reveals who's really been funding this fairy tale? Or because it shows these nice people exactly what kind of person you've become? Blake finally found his voice. Chloe, is this true? About the loans, the house? It's complicated, Chloe said quickly, but the damage was already done. The careful edifice of her independence, her success, her self-made image, all of it crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Actually, I said, my voice still infuriatingly calm, it's quite simple. I've been funding my daughter's life while she's been treating me like an embarrassment. Tonight, she decided to make that official by locking me away so you wouldn't see the pathetic man behind the curtain. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room tracking my movement. The question now is, what kind of people are you comfortable allowing your son to marry? Because I can tell you from experience, the woman sitting at this table isn't the daughter I raised. She's someone else entirely, someone I don't recognize. The silence stretched, thick with tension and revelation. Chloe's perfect evening lay in ruins around her, and for the first time in years, she had absolutely no idea how to fix it. Blake's mother was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. I think perhaps we should leave. This seems like a family matter that needs to be resolved privately. Actually, I said, my smile returning, I think it's exactly the kind of matter that should be resolved publicly. After all, you were about to become family. Don't you deserve to know what you're signing up for? Chloe's face went white as the full implications of my words hit her. Her engagement, her reputation, her carefully constructed future, all of it hanging by a thread, and I was holding the scissors. For the first time in decades, I held all the power. And Chloe, sitting at my table in my house, finally understood what it felt like to be pathetic. Blake's father set down his wine glass with deliberate precision, the kind of movement that meant someone was thinking very carefully about their next words. I recognized the gesture. I'd seen it in business meetings when deals were about to fall apart. Wait a minute, Robert said, his voice taking on that sharp, lawyerly edge I'd heard him use on conference calls. Blake, didn't you tell us just last month that you'd paid off your student loans early? That you and Chloe were completely debt-free? I watched Blake's face cycle through several expressions. Confusion, realization, then something approaching panic. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It was almost beautiful, watching years of carefully constructed lies crumble in real time. Well, technically, Blake stammered, and I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to find a way to spin this that wouldn't make him look a complete fraud. Technically, I interjected helpfully, the loans were paid off. By me. $63,000 to be exact. I have the bank transfer confirmations if you'd like to see them. Robert's eyebrows shot up so fast I was surprised they didn't launch off his forehead. 63,000? His voice climbed an octave. Blake, you told us you'd been aggressively saving, that Chloe had helped you create a budget. She did help with the budget, Blake said quickly, grasping at straws. She's amazing with finances. She's amazing at spending other people's finances, I corrected, watching Chloe flinch like I'd slapped her. The budget probably included a line item for Dad's contribution right at the top. Helen leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. And the apartment? The one you've been telling us about, with the marble countertops and the view of the park? I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. Not cruelly, just with genuine amusement at the scope of their deception. The apartment I helped purchase. Down payment, closing costs, first 6 months of mortgage payments. That marble, I helped pick it out. The view Chloe loves so much, she made me install blackout curtains because the morning light was too intense. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before an avalanche. Robert's face was transitioning through shades of red I didn't know existed, while Helen looked like someone had just told her the family jewels were costume pieces. "So let me understand this correctly," Robert said, his voice deadly quiet. I recognized that tone. It was the same one I used right before firing someone. "For the past year, you two have been bragging about your financial independence, your smart investments, your debt-free lifestyle, and it's all been funded by Chloe's father?" Chloe tried to interject, her voice high and desperate. "It's not that simple. It's more like a family investment." "A family investment?" I repeated, and even I was surprised by the ice in my own voice. "Is that what we're calling it? Because I don't remember signing any paperwork. I don't remember getting any returns. I don't remember even being asked, just told what you needed, when you needed it." Blake's mother was studying her future daughter-in-law like she was a particularly disturbing piece of modern art. "Chloe, dear," she said, and the dear dripped with enough venom to kill a small animal, "when you told us about how proud you were of building your life without help, about being a self-made woman, what exactly did you mean by that?" I watched Chloe's throat work as she swallowed what was probably the biggest lie of her life. Her eyes darted around the table like a trapped animal looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "I worked hard for everything I have," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she didn't believe it anymore. "You worked hard at working me," I said quietly. "There's a difference." Robert set down his napkin with the same deliberate precision he'd used with his wine glass. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who spent decades making or breaking careers with his words. "Blake," he said, not taking his eyes off Chloe, "help me understand something. When we had dinner last Christmas and you spent an hour telling me about Chloe's promotion, her salary increase, her brilliant financial planning, was any of that real?" Blake looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "The promotion was real," he said weakly. "But the financial planning?" Robert pressed. "Well," Blake's voice trailed off like air escaping from a balloon. "The financial planning," I said, filling the silence, "consisted primarily of calculating how much money she could extract from me without making it obvious what she was doing. And I have to admit, she was quite good at it. Very systematic. Very professional." The word professional hung in the air like a curse. Helen actually recoiled slightly, as if I'd suggested her future daughter-in-law was something much less respectable than manipulative. "Jesus Christ, Blake," Robert muttered, running his hands through his silver hair. "Do you understand what this looks like? We've been bragging about you two to our friends, our colleagues. We told the Hendersons that you were the perfect example of young people doing things right, building wealth responsibly. And now they're going to find out," Helen added, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "that our son is marrying someone who's been living off daddy's money while pretending to be financially independent." I felt a surge of satisfaction watching Chloe realize that her reputation, the thing she'd sacrificed our relationship to protect, was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. All her careful image management, all her strategic networking, all her social climbing, destroyed by the simple truth. "The irony," I said conversationally, "is that if Chloe had just been honest from the beginning, none of this would have been a problem. I was happy to help. I would have been proud to help, but she didn't want help. She wanted a silent partner, someone to fund her success story without being part of it." Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Blake, I think we need to have a very serious conversation. Privately." The way he said privately made it clear that this conversation was going to be anything but pleasant for his son. Blake's face went pale as he realized his father wasn't just disappointed, he was professionally embarrassed. In their social circle, financial deception wasn't just tacky, it was career suicide. Chloe finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Helen interrupted, her composure finally cracking. "Explain how you've been making fools of us all? Explain how every accomplishment you've shared with us was actually purchased by your father." I sat back in my chair, watching the destruction with the calm satisfaction of an architect whose carefully placed demolition charges were finally bringing down a condemned building. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequences. This was what happened when manipulation finally met reality. And the beautiful thing was, I hadn't had to lie, hadn't had to exaggerate, hadn't had to do anything except tell the simple, devastating truth. Sometimes the truth really is the most powerful weapon of all. The moment Robert stood up, I knew we'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. This wasn't just an awkward family dinner anymore. This was a reckoning 26 years in the making. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade, before anyone leaves, there's something else you should know. Chloe's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen before. She knew. Somehow, she knew that I wasn't finished, that the basement had been just the opening act. You see, I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket, I've been keeping records. Not intentionally at first, just father things. Receipts for gifts, bank transfers, credit card statements, the kinds of things you keep because you're proud of helping your child build their life. I pulled out my phone and placed it gently on the table. Such a small device to hold such devastating power. Over the years, those records became quite comprehensive. Every dollar I've given Chloe, every bill I've paid, every loan that was never repaid, every investment in her future that she's convinced everyone she made herself. The color drained from Blake's face as he began to understand the scope of what I was revealing. "How much?" he whispered. I smiled, and I could feel the weight of that smile. Not cruel, but inexorably final. Since her 18th birthday, $437,622.38. The number landed like a bomb in the center of the table. Helen actually gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Robert's face went through what I could only describe as the 5 stages of grief in Fast Forward. "That's impossible," Chloe said, but her voice cracked on the word impossible. She knew it wasn't. She'd been there for every transaction, every request, every carefully crafted story about why she needed just a little more help. "College tuition," I said, my voice taking on the rhythm of a eulogy. $68,000, law school $92,000, apartment down payment $45,000, car $31,000, Blake's student loans $63,000, wedding ring, the one hidden in the kitchen right now, $12,000, credit card debt from her building her career phase, $58,000. Should I continue? Blake's mouth was hanging open like a broken door. "Chloe, you told me you'd saved for the ring yourself. You said it was your grandmother's money." "It was my grandmother's money," Chloe said desperately. "It was just invested through my dad." The lie was so weak, so transparently pathetic, that even Helen winced. I almost felt sorry for Chloe in that moment. Watching someone you'd once loved destroy themselves was never pleasant, even when they deserved it. "Your grandmother," I said gently, "left you $500 and a china set. The ring money came from my retirement account, the account I was planning to live on when I got too old to work." That hit differently. Suddenly, this wasn't just about money. It was about an old man's future, sacrificed on the altar of his daughter's ambition. I could see it in their faces, the shift from confusion to genuine horror. Robert sank back into his chair, looking like someone had just told him his life's work was meaningless. "Blake," he said slowly, "when you applied for the partnership track at the firm, you listed your financial assets. You said you and Chloe had over $100,000 in savings." "We do," Blake started. "No," I interrupted gently. "Chloe has access to my accounts. She's an authorized user on my credit cards. What she's been telling you is her money isn't." The silence that followed was the sound of multiple futures collapsing simultaneously. Blake's partnership prospects, based partly on his financial stability, Chloe's reputation in their social circle, the fairy tale wedding they'd been planning, funded by a man they'd treated like an embarrassment. Helen was the first to find her voice, and when she spoke, her words were careful, deliberate, devastating. "Chloe, dear, help me understand something. When you showed me your investment portfolio last month, when you explained your diversification strategy, whose money were you actually showing me?" I watched my daughter's face crumble as she realized there was no way out. No spin, no explanation, no charm that could fix this. She'd built her entire adult identity on a foundation of lies, and now the foundation was cracking. It's complicated, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it anymore. It's actually quite simple, Robert said, his lawyer's mind cutting through the emotional chaos to the brutal facts beneath. You've been committing financial fraud against your own father, against my son, against anyone who's made decisions based on your fabricated financial status. The word fraud hung in the air like a curse. Chloe actually flinched as if the sound of it caused physical pain. I never meant, she started. What you meant, I said, my voice soft but implacable, was to use me until you didn't need me anymore. The problem is you always needed me. You just pretended you didn't. Blake was staring at his hands, probably calculating how much of his life over the past 3 years had been built on lies. The apartment we looked at last week, he said slowly. The one we put a deposit on. Chloe, how were we going to afford that? Chloe's silence was answer enough. Let me guess, Robert said, his voice dripping with disgust. Daddy was going to help with that too, but she was going to tell you it was her promotion bonus. I nodded. The down payment was coming from what's left of my 401k. That was the final straw. Blake actually stood up, his chair toppling backward. Chloe, what the hell? You've been planning our entire life around money that isn't yours. It's not that simple, Chloe finally exploded, her composure completely shattered. He wanted to help. He offered. I offered to help my daughter, I said quietly, not to be systematically drained by a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Chloe actually stepped backward as if I'd physically struck her. Helen gathered her purse with the kind of deliberate dignity that spoke of decades of practice in extricating herself from social disasters. Robert, I think we should go. Yes, Robert agreed, standing with the careful movements of a man who was reassessing everything he thought he knew. Blake, you're coming with us. We need to have a very long conversation about the difference between helping family and enabling fraud. Blake looked at Chloe with something that might have been love, or might have been pity, or might have been both. I can't. I need to think about all of this. Blake, please, Chloe said, and for the first time all evening, her voice carried genuine emotion instead of calculated performance. Don't let them poison you against me. But the damage was done. Not by me, not by his parents, by her. By years of lies, by the systematic deception of everyone who tried to love her. As they filed toward the door, Robert turned back to me. David, I want you to know, if you ever need legal advice about recovering any of that money, call me. What she's done, it's not just morally wrong. Might be criminal. Criminal. The word echoed in the sudden silence of the dining room as the door closed behind them. Chloe and I stood there alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. The engagement party was over. The engagement itself was hanging by a thread. Her reputation in shambles, her financial house of cards collapsed, her future as uncertain as a house built on sand. Dad? She whispered, and for a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to build dollhouses with me in the basement. What have you done? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and felt something that wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite relief. It was more like peace. The peace of finally telling the truth after years of living a lie. I told the truth, sweetheart, I said simply. I told the truth. In the days that followed, Chloe tried everything. First came the anger, calls at 3 a.m, voicemails filled with accusations that I'd destroyed her life and ruined everything. She screamed that I was a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see her happy, that I'd sabotaged her relationship out of jealousy. I listened to each message with the detached interest of someone watching a storm from behind bulletproof glass. This was grief, I realized. She was mourning the loss of her personal ATM, and like all grief, it came in stages. Then came the guilt tactics. Chloe showed up at my door with tears streaming down her face, begging me to call Robert and explain that it had all been a misunderstanding, that she'd always intended to pay me back, that we were family, and family helped each other. You're right, I told her, standing in the doorway of my own home, the home I'd finally reclaimed. Family does help each other. But what you've been doing isn't help. It's exploitation. There's a difference. She tried to push past me, to come inside like she always had, but I held my ground. Chloe, you're not welcome here anymore. The shock on her face was almost comical. After 26 years of unconditional access to my life, my money, my love, the concept of boundaries was apparently foreign to her. You can't do this to me, she said, her voice shaking. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter, I replied quietly. Now you're a woman who chose to treat her father like a business transaction, and this transaction is closed. The bargaining phase lasted 2 weeks. Chloe enlisted my sister Linda, her old college friends, even our family pastor to call me and talk sense into me. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd start by acknowledging that Chloe had made mistakes, then gradually pivot to how I was being too harsh and needed to forgive and move forward. But I'd moved forward. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Robert called me personally. His voice was formal, professional, but underneath I could hear something that sounded like respect. David, I wanted you to know, Blake and Chloe's engagement is officially over. We've also arranged for full restitution of any money Blake spent that came from your accounts. It's going to take some time, but every dollar will be returned with interest. I felt something I hadn't expected, a small pang of sadness. Not for the money, but for Blake. He'd been as much a victim of Chloe's manipulation as I had been. Robert, that's not necessary, I started. Yes, it is, he interrupted firmly. My son may have been fooled, but he's not a thief. He'll work every day for the next 5 years to pay back what he unknowingly accepted from you. It's a matter of honor. Honor. Such an old-fashioned concept, but one that apparently still meant something to some people. 2 months later, I received a text from Chloe. I got a new job. Making 6 figures. I don't need your money anymore. I stared at the message for a long time, marveling at how she still didn't understand. It had never been about the money. It had been about respect, about love, about being treated like a human being instead of a resource to be mined. I didn't respond. My brother Mike visited last weekend, sitting in the kitchen that finally felt like mine again. You know, he said, nursing a beer and looking around the space, this place feels different. Lighter, somehow. He was right. The house felt like home again instead of a branch office of Chloe's life. I'd redecorated, moved things around, made it mine. For the first time in years, every decision I made was about what I wanted, not what someone else needed from me. Any regrets? Mike asked. I thought about it seriously, rolling the question around in my mind like a stone in my mouth. Did I regret losing my daughter? Did I regret the money? The money? Did I regret 26 years of unconditional love? I regret that it took me so long to see what she'd become, I said finally. I regret enabling her transformation from a loving child into someone I didn't recognize. But stopping it when I did? No, that I don't regret. Mike nodded slowly. Love without boundaries isn't love, he said. It's enabling. You finally learned the difference. He was right. Love, real love, required respect, reciprocity, and recognition of each other's humanity. What Chloe had given me was conditional affection in exchange for unconditional support. That wasn't love. It was a business arrangement disguised as family.